Hello and welcome to this week's review of My Hero Academia. This week I'm reviewing the final season of My Hero Academia, Season 8, and we're going to be kicking off this review, as we always do with these reviews, by talking about the positives and the headline positives. The big things I'm discussing over the course of this video. I loved the animation throughout, I loved seeing the aftermath of the final confrontation, and I feel that this is the best possible ending that we could have gotten. I know that last point might feel like damning with faint praise, but I'll discuss that in greater detail later on. Now, for clarification, I am not counting the upcoming OVA as part of all of this. I know there's one rumoured, and at the time of writing and recording this, nothing's been confirmed, and while some may consider it in episode 12, I can't in good faith do that. I will get a review of that when it comes out. And be sure to like, favourite, subscribe the video for more from me. There will be more My Hero Academia stuff coming in the new year. And of course there will be the Christmas special coming shortly. With all that said, let us get into the review itself and kick off this review by talking about the animation. Now this is not something I've discussed for the past few weeks or so. Mostly due to the fact the animation has just been so good. It almost feels like trying to define how wet water is. It feels like something that doesn't need to be said, but here we are at the season long review, and I think it's time to give it its kudos and give it its gratis. Whilst I feel the previous season was a little bit more consistent, though itself not as consistent with its animation as prior ones, I think that this season, whilst is less consistent, the gaps in that inconsistency are narrower, and those peak moments are peak. They are the highest brilliant moments you could possibly have. Again, might sound like damning with faint praise, but there are moments in this year's season where the animation quality approaches cinema level quality and then goes beyond that somehow. And whilst those moments may be one shot or one sequence or one shot in a wider sequence, it's all done with just a fantastic level of quality. Again, it's not more consistent than the previous ones. I think it's less consistent, but the quality overall makes up for that inconsistency. And when it is at a lower point in quality, it's not bad, it's not terrible, there's never a shot in this one thinking, oh, they've just recycled something, or this is obviously rotoscoped, or this is obviously CGI, or anything like that. It's all brilliant, and given that nearly 2/3 of this season is based upon action, and that this is the final season, they really just went beyond and just didn't leave anything in the tank. They threw everything at this to make this as spectacular as they possibly could do, so that it would live up to the hype of this being the final season, despite the best efforts of some of the manga fans trying to rain on that parade. Not all of them, but we all know that this season, going into it, there was a little bit of a dirge of negativity, but hey, here we are, and everyone just seems to be more or less satisfied, apart from a few people wanting to make money out of their negativity. But with all that said and done, this season needed to be more than just action spectacle. And we'll get on to other animation in a moment, but there was, as we're still talking about the action, a great variety in the action that we saw, both in terms of the types of action seen and how it was all put together. One of my greatest fears for this series is the final battle or final battles would descend into Dragon Ball Z anime action minus the physicality that they had there. That it would be like much of modern superhero action fiction, where two functionally identical heroes and villains would be bouncing off one another, just using the same power sense against one another, and there'd be major levels of destruction, countless thousands dead, but no one would give a toss because our plucky hero managed to go a level beyond, to go beyond and save the day. You're not dealing with your average Deco anymore, you're now dealing with the legendary Super Deco. And that is something that I feared when we got to the fight with Redestro and Toma a couple seasons ago, given that we're at the point where people are throwing laser blasts at one another, and I thought, oh crap, what's that going to mean for when we get to this point? But we don't have that. We have a wide variety of different action and different styles of action. The fight between All Might and All For One, I think it's fantastic because we end up seeing what it would be like for a totally different kind of hero that we've never seen in this series before, which is the Iron Man mech suit kind of thing, and seeing how that would deal going up against a threat like All For One. As well as that, we've also just seen the strange mutagenic powers of Tomra, and then later the All For Tomra mutant fusion thing going up against every hero and their powers. And whilst yes, that is a visual spectacle, it's visual spectacle that avoids this just being, like I said, a hero and a villain with function identical powers just punching each other in the face until one of them explodes, which ironically is how All For One Tomra fusion thing dies in the end, but still, we got there by having a very effective action sequence, both in terms of the choreography and the staging of it, but also in terms of our emotional connection to all of it. My Hero Academia largely has avoided falling into the Dragon Ball Z punching people in the field trap, and I'm not using that as a slight against Dragon Ball Z, I love it, but that's the touchstone that I come to when we think about big, over-the-top fights, particularly when we get to Super, where it is people throwing planets at each other and that kind of crap, where the power level is just so vast it almost becomes meaningless, and we avoid that for the most part, as whilst our characters are powerful, we have a level of emotional investment in them, which really helps us to feel something when they're in these fights. There is this great emotional justification for these things happening. Not always, sometimes is just superhero fun, is this character has this power, let's see how they fight against one another. But in prior seasons and in this one, it's often the case that our heroes aren't just fighting these villains for the sake of looking cool or for the sake of being in a cool action sequence. There's a greater thematic and emotional reason for it. That there is a connection between that hero and that villain in some way. Either a direct emotional connection between each other, or there is some kind of emotional stake behind this hero fighting it. Like the fight between Aoyama and that Rose villain. There's no real connection to them. They don't reflect one another really in a credible and tangible way for me. But there's still a point in it because Aoyama is here with his, this is the last time I'll be part of Class 1A. At the time, you don't know if that's going to mean some big sacrifice for him or what, but that's his emotional stake in all of this, and that gives us the emotional stake in him, hoping that he goes through this fine. And also in that fight, we see Toro leaping out to deflect the laser blast, and that shows how she has accepted what he has done and to some degree forgiven him for being the Class 1A traitor. And it shows that there is a level of emotion connection there, even if there is no direct one between that hero and that villain in that moment. Bakugo's fight with All For One is about him becoming the hero that he always wanted to be, thinking and acting as a hero, the best version of himself. Not to be the best hero, but to be the truest form of himself. To fight a foe that is becoming increasingly more reckless and adolescent, and to some certain point of view, almost like a reflection of the petulant brat that we saw of Bakugo towards the start of this series. Bakugo fights through his pain, both physical and mental, and All For One is trying to just cure that pain by using this super-powered healing thing, and in the end, Bakugo defeats the villain, the big bad behind all of this. He does something that Midoriya never could, because at the end of the day, he was able to be the true version of himself, like Midoriya ends up being the true version of himself when he fights Tomura, and then the later version of All For One. The fight between Tomura and Midoriya is Midoriya trying to be the thing that Tomura needed when he was a child. He needed someone to save him, to reach out to him, to save that scared little boy engulfed with grief and fear. And whilst I've said in the past, I don't think that All For One would have allowed that to go forward and that he would have had that happy, peaceful life. At the very least in this moment, it was Midoriya being the best version of himself, being the person that could save the person in that moment. And of course, we had the battle between All Might and All For One, showing All Might using the combined strengths and things that he has learnt from his students to fight a villain who just steals power and just uses people and doesn't use them as people. He just uses them as pawns on on a chessboard, and all of that brings these fights have a great emotional weight to them, which I truly just find rather brilliant, and it makes us invest in these fights in a way that you don't do in certain other pieces of superhero fiction, because it doesn't do the busy work either leading up to that moment or even in the moment itself of making you feel for these characters. And there are many key moments like this in this season that I can't talk about due to timing and the previous ones, but all these key moments in this season are animated brilliantly. You have all the thrills and spills and fears that you could possibly want in moments like this, from the high-octane action spectacle of watching Bakugo chasing down All For One. That is one of the best action sequences for that character ever, and just a powerful moment where the biggest, scariest bad guy is fearing just the bratty kid that only about 18 or so months ago was just dicking around in his middle school. Now he's chasing down one of the greatest villains that there ever is in this brilliantly put together just chase sequence. And then you have the whole thing of All For One grabbing All by the throat, and the sheer fear factor that you have in that moment, that maybe that vision of the future of him dying a horrible death is going to come true. And even beyond this, even just on a more mechanical thing, the design work that we get in this series as it progresses is likewise just as stellar. From the living corpse thing of Dabby in his machine looking something out of Warhammer 40,000, to the designs of our heroes in later life and the power armor that All Might has, it's all impeccable, it's all unimpeachable with just how well it's put together. There are frequent design choices in this season, moments that in another season, in another series, would be the visual of that given season. This will be the thing that people looking back and thinking back to those seasons will go, this is that moment, this is the season where this happened. But that isn't the case. That isn't the case because they are just allowed to be. They're allowed to be and be sincere. These are defining moments in the stories of these characters, but they're not designed to be iconic. They're not designed almost by committee to be iconic and by corporate request. They are the end points, the natural end points and natural conclusions to these characters. And from a visual standpoint and just a storytelling standpoint, that is brilliant. This series, yes, it could have gone in very different directions, certainly in terms of the action, to make some of these far more satisfying, far more spectacular, with new powers, new abilities, new forms, new combos of abilities. You could have had that big final, almost Avengers Endgame reunion coming together action sequence, but even more spectacular, with more heroes and more moments and more stuff and more that and more this and more that. But it doesn't have that, because all throughout this, the writer and the people doing this series never lose sight of what this series is in itself. Because in the end of the day, the thing that saves the day here is the willingness to save someone who could never be saved before. And that is something that is hinted at throughout all of this. It is something that is hinted at from the beginning of this series up until now and into the final episode itself, where because people were there for other people when it mattered, the rate of villainy is going down. And that final action sequence, when they are all teaming up and all working together, it is a reflection of Midoriya being there for other people and then paying it back. Not just his classmates, not just his teachers, not just the people that he's helped along the way, but people inspired by him in that moment. It all creates something that is satisfying, even if it isn't the grand action spectacle that it could have been in a different series. More broadly, with regard to other things and looking to other matters, because I could easily talk about the action stuff and the animation stuff all day, My Hero Academia is a series that isn't afraid to show the aftermath and repercussions of the choices and actions of its cast. Be it the multi-decade choices of All Might and All For One and their decisions for their legacies and their futures, to the parental choices of Endeavour and everything that he did, to Stain's manifesto and how that has impacted upon the world, and certainly at least in Japan, and with the aftermath stuff that we get from the hospital and villa attack a couple of seasons ago. Other series just don't go into this, and if they do, it's very short-lived. It may be a facet of a bigger movie, or a scene in a bigger movie, or part of a conclusion of a bigger movie, but it'll never be the thing itself. And yes, this series doesn't quite go to the full length of showing everything being rebuilt. We don't see the full healing physically and mentally and structurally of Japan over the course of the final few episodes of this season, but we at least see enough of it for it to be satisfying. And we never really see the longer term repercussions of this either. Like, the closest thing that I can think about in terms of things that change the world in other series that I was in some way invested in was the Civil War stuff with this Marvel Cinematic Universe, but even then, that itself, despite being a monumental shift in that universe, didn't really seem to do anything. It was a short-term twist to justify an action sequence, and here, that isn't the case. We see the immediate aftermath, the long-term aftermath, and even well after that. We see how this society is slowly changing and growing, from Granny being there for that kid that needed it, to seeing how our characters are growing and evolving and being there to support one another, to then later on in life where we see everything in that final half of that, well, more than half, 2/3 of that final episode. I do wish there was more in the immediate aftermath stuff, the days and the weeks afterwards, showing the healing both physically and mentally. I don't think it would have necessarily made for a great ending for this series. I don't think that most audiences would have gone through it, and I am glad that we got what we got. And look, there's like a dozen different spin-offs for this series. You could easily do a thing of, okay, this is dealing with their life and immediate thereafter. There's some small scale heroics, there's some recovery stuff, but that's about it, and that would be fine. But it is clear after all of this, in the immediate term and even into the longer term, our cast have gone through hell, and that trauma is what's holding many of them back from doing certain things, and may make them act in ways that might otherwise have surprised them. We have the scene with Spinner and Midoriya, which whilst yes, I was screwed over by Crunchyroll's AI-generated subtitles on my first viewing, even reviewing it with the real subtitles and the real text there, it's clear that there's an aspect to Midori that definitely has changed, certainly as regards to his treatment of a character like Spinner. The way that he looks at him and the way that we have that pause and how long it goes on for, that's Midori sending a clear message to Spinner in a way that I don't think he would have done had Spinner been arrested maybe a few months prior to all of this. He's making it very clear that if Spinner tries to screw around and set off a new age of villains, he's not going to try and save him, and he's not going to be there to save him if the heroes decide, you know what, we're not letting this go down again a second time. Because that's a discussion for all of the point. And without getting further into fan theory territory, I think that there is a reason why we never got Uraraka telling Izuku that she loves him, and I think that's in part due to the trauma of seeing what happened with Toga. Toga was the first person that ever told her that she loved her, and she died thereafter. She died horrifically. She died trying to save Uraraka, and that is something that would stick with you. Our characters have their scars laid bare before us, and they're more than just physical. They see the world in a very different way, as Uraraka says when she looks at the cityscape and how it's been repaired and how it's been changed, and they know it can never truly go back. And in some ways the world has changed for the better, in other ways it's changed for the worse, and even it has as a net positive change for the better, they're never going to really be able to enjoy that newer world. And in many ways, yes, we do see it change for the better. Granny saving that guy shows that that society is shifting, and that's something that happens very early doors into all of this. And yes, there might be other villains that will pop up. There will be movies and such, probably set in the 10-year time skip where our heroes will fight them and they'll try and cause a new era of darkness to come about, only to be defeated. But at the end of the day, we can see the green shoots of a changing world. This is a happy ending, and there's nothing about it which is going to be cynical or twisted to say, haha, no, there's actually these villains waiting in the background. It's, ooh, you know, Midori's missing father, well, he's a villain, and he's here now. Ooh, he's going to be the leader of the villains in My Hero Academia too. We don't have anything of all of that. We don't go into that path anyway whatsoever. We get a feeling of uncertainty in the immediate term, the fears that we get to see the fears and worries of some of our cast in that time period. Fears that might be founded because, there's no guarantee that there will never be a major villain threat at any point in the not distant future. But given that we get to the end of all of this and they talk about villain rates being down and there being no reference to any other major villain that came up in that time period, well, we know that it turned out alright in the end, but they didn't know it in that moment, and we can see that fear and apprehension within them. And whilst we do get into a position of, okay, it all turned out likely okay in the end, we still have that sense of uncertainty leading up into all of that. And when we do get to that future, when we do get to the future point towards the end of that final episode, there is still that sense that the healing still hasn't been completed for some people and may never truly be completed. And whilst I can respect that some things have been left unsaid, and that from a certain point of view I can accept that, and I do think there are some that certainly needed saying. I do think there are certain aspects of the plot and the characters and the development I think still needed to be said. But the truth of the matter, just given the way that this series was being written towards the end of the manga, how would you do that? Like, there is the argument that I will make later on that maybe the aftermath stuff, the immediate aftermath stuff should have been longer, but given that apparently the creator of this series is going into hospital from just sickness from pneumonia and God only knows what else, where would you have found the time to do it? And after a certain point, there's going to be an argument of case of, okay, who's the next big bad, who's the next major villain, and yeah, all this stuff is good, but it's depressing. We don't want to see our characters dealing with depression and such. We want to see them being happy. And maybe we'll get that look into this time period in the future, but for the time being at least, they've had their happy ending. My Hero Academia is a far more grounded series than I think that many people give it credit for. Despite the wild variety of superpowers, character designs, and aspects of the story, this is a fairly grounded universe. And whilst we do move into something a little more celebratory in the immediate aftermath of all of this, there's still a coolness to the victory that I can't help but respect. Yes, it all turns out alright in the end. Yes, our heroes have their happy ever after in whichever way that they can do, but there is no grand victory parade. There is no immediate time of everything being good and everything being kind and everything fantastic. The immediate aftermath for these characters is they've got to help rebuild everything and make it better. There is no grand, here you go, you can sit out for the rest of however long this is. No, they're an active part of the healing, and I think that is great. We see the uncertainty, we see the fear, we see the realities of there not being a thank you, here's your medal. We see our cast in hospital dealing with the just emotional fatigue as well as the physical fatigue of everything they're going through. And the reality that soon hits them that the world has changed now. We see that with Bakugo realising that his what I'll do after the war moment where he envisioned that he and Midoriya would have this friendly rivalry trying to push each other to heights better and higher than ever before, that they'll be fighting out for the #1 spot, will never come true now. And as a result, from his point of view, he'll never truly be able to make amends for how he treated Midoriya in the past. At least in the immediate term there and then. You can make the argument that what happens with this suit at the end of the series, that he does go some hell of a way to turn that all around, but that isn't the case for him. Bakugo is robbed the future that he had hoped for. Even though he got his grand anime final confrontation to the villain, he didn't get the grand anime prize of him having this friendly rivalry with a character who went from being a victim to a supporter to the best friend. And that is a darker side to his future, but one that is just a sign of the realities of this series. And as we go forward with this, as we go forward into those episodes in the aftermath, we get a growing sense of normalcy with our cast and the world. But you also, like I said previously, you get this sense that our cast will never truly be able to appreciate it. As we see with Uraraka when she stood looking at the cityscape, and how she talks about the shadows being longer and that she's seeing them, and how there's this sense of uncertainty with the future. And we get a sense with many of these characters, even in the end, after everything that's happened, even with this near decade-long time skip, they've never really readjusted to the world. It is this "you can never go home" idea. It's like the end of the Lord of the Rings movies, where you have the hobbits in the pub and everyone's just dancing about and drinking and having fun, same as it ever was, yet they're all sat there and they've had this horrific experience that they can't even begin to discuss with other people, because even if they did, they could never understand the horrors of what they've gone through. Our cast is traumatized and will be dealing with all of this for the rest of their lives. They'll never truly heal from it, but at least they can try and still make the world around them better. You could have had an ending, like I said in the previous review, that was more dramatic or maybe more cynical. You could have set up for a future series and spin-offs and alternate stuff coming down the pipeline. You could have set up for the next series and the next series after that. Here's a hint of who the villain will be in My Hero Academia Part 2. Here's where the landscape of all this is going in the not too distant future. This is a setup for the new movie that will probably come in the summer. But we didn't get that. In the end, we got our last chance to feel with our characters, to get this, to feel with this cast on an emotional level, and to get this sense of relief that it's all finally over. The darkness is over. And I know that this is a controversial point for some people, but I think that at the end of the day, this season is the best possible ending that we could have got. I know, like I said towards the start of this review, that might seem like damning with faint praise, but I know that there's some people out there that aren't keen on it for different reasons, for a variety of different reasons. Two of them that I've seen and seen mentioned are that some people wanted Uchako to reveal her love for Midoriya, and that was a sole point. I know that it was a sole point with people in the manga about a year or so ago. There's some people, like a friend of mine, that really wanted Midoriya to keep his powers, and they think it's, I suppose, a bit of a bum note that they didn't get to keep their powers, and that kind of ruins the ending a little bit for them. But I disagree, because at the end of the day, what this story is and what it was going to be about was set up in that first episode, and it is something that, with all due respect, countless video essays have misunderstood for years now, for the better part of a decade now. They have critically misunderstood that moment, and it is the moment where All Might says to Midoriya, "You don't need superpowers to be a hero." And the countless video essays and discussion pieces and blogs and vlogs with people saying, well, you know, if that was really the case, then My Hero Academia would have been Midoriya becoming a hero without having superpowers. He'd make gadgets like Batman or whoever, like Blue Beetle or whoever. But that's not what this series is about. It's not about becoming a superhero. It's not even about really being about a hero. It's about that core idea. You don't need superpowers to be a hero. That has been the core of this series from the very beginning, and is run through the entirety of this series like the lettering on a stick of Blackpool Rock. It has been part of the DNA of this series from that moment, and in the end of the day, that is how this world was saved. This is how we were able to get to the point where Midoriya is able to be a teacher, and there hasn't been a major villain threat in nearly a decade. It wasn't saved because of the power of One for All. It wasn't saved because Midoriya defeated All for One. Sure, that helped, but the big thing that saved this world was because Midoriya was able to start a greater change in society. Sure, defeating the big bad villains helped in the short term, but at the end of the day, Midoriya was able to instill a change in that society, because it was able to be saved because of people making an active and proactive effort to stop people going down dark paths, to be there to catch people when they fall. Almost every villain that we see in this series got to the position that they're in, went down the path that they did because of society kicking them down in some way, shape or form. I don't need to go through all of them, because you know them. If you're watching this, you know this series, you know the characters that I'm referring to. The vast majority of them ended up in the position that they did because the society that they lived in would not let them be. It would not let them have the happiness that they needed. It would not have them have the kindness that they needed. They are characters who would never have become a villain if they had had a better home life, or had a kinder education, had a society that accepted them, lived in a nation that wasn't bigoted towards them in some way, shape or form. And we see how, where society that decides to intervene with these people to save them when they are falling, how that then starts to change, how we have a decade of villain rates going down to the point that some people are saying, well, we might not need so many heroes in the future. And in that final episode, we see much of our cast ensuring that they can save as many people as they can, to catch them before they fall, to stop them going down darker paths, by not just turning up when they're trying to rob the bank or steal the diamond or what have you, but to be there before that happens. We see Uraraka, Froppy and their friends doing counselling in schools for kids with quirks. We see Tentacool and Coda going out to rural communities to do talks about heteromorph quirks. And yes, there will always be powerful villains. There'll be movies from now to the end of bloody time set in this bloody universe and this time period. But there'll be fewer of them. Because people will be living in a world where if they can't fit in for whatever reason, they're not going to be treated the same way that they were in the way that led to the League of Villains and the people that supported them. And if some big hero controversy comes around like it did with Endeavour, it's not going to break the entire season, or break the entire world, I should say. And in the end, the thing that ultimately saves this world, or at least saves Japan in this world, is this societal shift of people being more willing to support and help people who are going down these dark paths, or might be about to go down these dark paths, to show them a better world, a better alternative, to support them, to be there for them, to save them going down these dark, depressive paths that have made people like Spinner and all the other people in that group become villains. And that's the thing that ultimately saves this world and saves the day. It wasn't superpowers, it wasn't superhero action, it was being a human being, and being kind and being empathetic. And we see that in the final moments of this episode. Midoriya was there for people when they needed him. He was there for them, and we saw that being paid back to him in that big final confrontation with everyone coming out the portals to defeat the big bad villain. And we see that again in the end, after a decade of him still being there to support them and still being there to help them, where he's given that suit. And I know that might be a bit much for everyone, but that suit is the physical embodiment of their love and respect for him. Because for this world, to be a hero is to act without thinking, and to act with kindness, and to act with empathy. And whilst this ending is not visually spectacular, it's not people throwing buildings at one another, it's not powers, it's not going a level beyond, thematically it's spectacular, because it wraps up that core idea from the beginning of all of this, which is that you don't need superpowers to be a hero. And that's the one lesson, if anything, that we as human beings should take from this series, because there's a world of people out there who are hurt, who are broken, who need saving, who need someone in their life that's going to be the shoulder to cry on, someone that's going to support them through the deepest, darkest moments of their life. And that's what this series is telling us. It's telling us that we need to be there to pick them up before they fall, because God only knows where they're going to land, and God only knows what kind of impact they will leave when they fall. It's about being a human being. It's not about being a superhero. And thematically, this ending makes perfect sense with how we started all of this. This is not the story about how Midoriya became the world's greatest superhero. Really, it's the story about how Midoriya became the world's greatest human. Because at the end of the day, he was able to act selflessly, because he knows what it's like to be powerless, as we all do. And we all really should be there to help and support those in our lives and those in the worlds around us who can't support themselves at the moment, who don't have the emotional strength, the mental strength to do that. And that's the big takeaway from all of this, I think, and that's why I feel that this ending is the best possible one that we could have got. Yes, there's a couple of things here and there that could have been done on a more fan servicey level, but at the end of the day, given what this series is about, or at least what it's about to me, that's why I think that it's a perfect ending, near perfect ending. With that said, however, let's get into the negatives, and the headline negatives are that I feel that certain plot points are a bit abrupt. The aftermath feels rather short, and at the end of the day, this season ultimately feels like season 7 part 2. Now, the plot, I'm going to be honest, these negatives are difficult for me to put together because at the end of the day, this is a season that I think is more good than it is bad. And with everything said and done, my issues with it are more mechanical than they are necessarily emotive or thematic or in terms of execution of certain ideas and concepts. But we've got to say it. So first of all, certain plot points just feel rather abrupt. The whole matter of Aoyama having his "this is the last day that I'm going to be a member of UA," that ultimately doesn't have much of emotional weight to it because he has his big thing, he starts blowing up these flowers and then nothing else. There is no great sacrifice moment or a sense of sacrifice from him. I don't think we needed to kill him off or anything like that, but it was brave of him to do that. But then as soon as he announces he's leaving, that whole sequence of events just feels like no one gave a shit in the episode or in that world, and maybe to a certain degree the feelings against him were still raw and they weren't really willing to sympathise with him, but still they gave him a party, so I don't know. Like, you could have easily had an episode which was wrapping things up and him just saying a genuine farewell and thank you to everyone, but we didn't get that. The aftermath of everything just feels rather short. Like I said previously, I am aware that the writer of this series, let's be honest, was not in a good way physically towards the end of My Hero Academia, and it's obvious how just short and truncated certain aspects of the series just feel towards the end of it. I don't think we needed the time skip to the third year, and if we were going to have a time skip to the third year, I think that something else needed to happen in that time period. Even if it's just a case of, oh wow, Mirio's really climbing up the hero charts, he's doing pretty bloody well, or even just a cute little thing of, oh, even just as a little bit of a filler thing, oh, a local primary school is doing a short play about what it is to be a hero and who their real heroes are. And, oh, Deku's my favourite hero. I mean, he's not a pro hero, but I really do like him. And, oh, yeah, being a hero is about saving people before bad things happen to them and that kind of stuff. That'd be cute, but we don't get anything like that. And, yes, I understand we're going down the path of how I would have done it, but even still, there are aspects of it that just feel rather short. And, yes, you could do an entire season of dealing with the aftermath of all of this, with a few action scenes and gags thrown in here and there to keep it entertaining, but there are certain aspects, like I say, with the plot points, is that just feel rather abrupt, like we're doing them because they need to be done. It's like the graduation stuff when they're in their third year. It feels like it needs to be done because people would have been complaining of, oh, we never got to see them graduate, isn't that a shame? And it does feel like fan service, and not bad fan service, but even still, it doesn't feel like it's necessarily needed, and it feels like it takes time from other things. I suppose there's also just the emotional thing of, this is a season that could be 25 episodes, it's only about 11, but of course I don't think you could have done 14 episodes of Aftermath. But maybe you could have done, I really don't know. I really don't know whether or not the fans would be into that. My final negative, and I know that I'm just rattling through the negatives because, like I say, it's hard for me to be negative towards the series because I think that it just does everything bloody well. But even still, there is just this profound feeling throughout all of this I have that it just feels like Season 7 Part 2, which I know might seem a bit stupid bearing in mind it's set during the same time frame, but it does feel like I would have got a lot more out of this season had I binge-watched Season 7 before this and just been in that mind space and just been in that moment and still had this connection to it, because it doesn't really feel to me like I properly got fully into speed and fully invested into this season as I did do with previous seasons. And there is this sense of, I want more from this. And it's also, I want more of this because I like these characters, but it's also, I want more of this because it feels as though I've been shortchanged that we only got 11 episodes for this. I understand why there was, because you couldn't really do anything else here without adding stuff in and doing filler stuff here and there and focusing on characters that weren't really necessarily important to that moment. But nonetheless, there is just this vibe of, okay, this is just, it's 10 episodes that you could have had at the end of the previous season, which I know that they're dealing with having 25 episodes. That seems to be the quota. And there's rumours that the next series of Vigilantes is going to be 25 episodes, so God only knows where that ends. I think it's going to cover stuff that I've not read in the manga yet, but even still, there is just this feeling of, you could have had more here, is my honest feeling. You could have had more here. I think that I don't know. Like I say, it's the case of that it feels like Season 7 Part 2, and that had I watched this immediately after finishing another rewatch of Season 7, I would have been in the mind space and that place to feel of this. And that's not to say that it didn't take anything away from it, it's just a case of you're jumping in right into the middle of the action. You're jumping right into the middle of this, and you're expected to keep pace with this. There is no recap, no recover. It's just, right, you're in the middle between the fight of All Might and All for One, and now you have to deal with it. Which, look, as far as a set of negatives is concerned, this is the least negative coming out of a season of My Hero Academia I've been for a very long time. With that said, let us get into the overview. And, look, much like last year, my issues with this season are largely more mechanical, like I say, rather than in terms of the story, the performances, or the theming. Most of this comes to the fact that I do think that we get an ending to this series, this entire series, that is near perfect for what has gone before it, that really does feel like it is a thematic bridge to what we got towards the start of this series. And at the end, it's only let down by the fact there's aspects of it that feel like it's a tad rushed. With this series, there's always been, and with Vigilantes, there's always been this case of me thinking, you could have done this a little bit longer. You could have pulled this out for another episode or explored this for another episode or two. And I understand why that wasn't the case here, given everything that was happening behind the scenes, but there is just this case of, look, this in another season of My Hero Academia, there would have been a good 5 or 6 episodes dealing with the aftermath of all of this, just the fight itself. And it was only like an episode and a half, really. And from there on, it's just a case of, okay, everything we get is great, but it feels though certain aspects of it are just rushed and overlooked. And we do have the choose your own and ending aspect of it almost. And this, at the end of the day, still, we do get a brilliant ending and a brilliant season, which at times feels like it does run the risk of getting lost in its own action spectacle. But at the end of the day, this final ending, this ending of this season as a whole, feels like an honest and true end to this series. And I really do take my hat off to it. They stuck the landing for me. I know that it's not for everybody. I know that about a year ago, when I concluded my review of the last season, there was someone that left a comment discussing what they thought of the series after having read the manga. They weren't best pleased about it. I might go back to see what their complaints are, but look, as someone who just watches the anime of this series and doesn't get involved in the manga, I have to say that this season has been spectacular, has been great. And I think that given what this series is really about, at least from my opinion, this is the best possible way that you could have ended it. And then again, I know that sounds like damning with faint praise, but it's brilliant as far as I'm concerned. With that said and done, however, let's get into Comment Corner! It's time for Comment Corner, the final one of the main series, for the time being at least. Our first comment comes from Sergeant Gunnery, who says, "Thanks for the review, man. Thank you very much." Our next comment comes from Big X1, who says, "Like I said last week, it feels weird that it has ended. Not sure what the OVA will be about, if there is one. I like this final season. I started watching the last one before this one, so it was a smooth transition into this one. I think the post-battle stuff could have been its own storyline, rather than just a few episodes at the end." Thank you for your comment, and I think for me, at the very least, I'm still in the sinking in phase, and that's going to take longer to do, bearing in mind that Vigilantes is going to come back in a couple of weeks' time, so yeah, it feels odd that we're getting into that so soon. I would have expected that to come later in the year, particularly bearing in mind that there's some big shows coming through in January and February. I think like the day or two after Vigilantes comes back, the next season of Jujutsu Kaisen comes back, and God knows how many other premieres and returns, so it's got its work cut out for it. And if the rumours are true that this is going to be 25 episodes long, well, it could be the penultimate series there, which feels very, very weird itself. Anyway, our next comment comes from Scott TV Gamer, who says, "I love the ending when it came out, and the anime made it even better. A lot of new additions like the graduation scenes. Only issue I had is that I felt there was one thing genuinely missing from it. But the final manga volume release with 30 plus pages long bonus chapter that the anime didn't adapt for this season, which currently is believed to be saved for the rumoured OVA. This episode adapted the thematic ending to the series, whilst the bonus chapter is more personal, and actually had one that had that one missing element I mentioned. So there's a bit more after this, and if it's not adapted, well, it's more reason for the people to check out the manga. Oh yeah, the character seen reading Spinner's book in prison is actually Mr. Compress. Thank you for your comment, and well, it just goes to show just how unfamiliar I am with Mr. Compress without his mask on. It will be interesting to see exactly what the OVA is going to have in it. I mean, here we are, it is only 4:30 on Friday evening when I'm recording this part of the video, and as far as I'm aware, there's been no announcements, but then the reveal that there was going to be a new season of Vigilantes just was quietly revealed, just seemingly randomly, so we'll see where it all ends up going. Now, I understand that this might be this probably will be the last video of this year, and there's a good chance for a lot of you this might be the last video of mine that you ever watch. My Hero Academia is finished now. It wouldn't surprise me if this is the final time that some of us actually share some time together. If that's the case, I'll say thank you for being with this series, being with this channel for however long and short that might be. This might be the first video ever watched of mine, maybe watching since I started covering My Hero Academia a good 3 or 4 years ago, however long it's been. And if you are checking out, then thank you. I mean, it would be nice to see you remain here. There is still some My Hero Academia related stuff coming soon. There's the Christmas special that will be dropping next week. Before Christmas itself, there will be, of course, Vigilantes in a couple of weeks' time, as well as a few things here and there, and the OVA review when and if that actually comes out. I understand that for some people, they're here for My Hero Academia, and now that is done, it's going to be goodbye for now. Maybe there'll be a new series of the mainline stuff in the not-too-distant future, I don't know. That's not for me to speculate on as of yet. Though, let's be honest, if there's going to be, we're probably not going to see it this side of 2028. But regardless, whether you're here for a long time, whether you're here for a short time, thank you all for being here. If you're going to stick around, be sure to like, favourite and subscribe. Like I say, there'll be more stuff coming down the pipeline shortly. If the OVA comes out between now and the Christmas special, you'll probably see the review in the new year. If you see it, let me know what you thought about it in the comment section down below, and I'll read your comments when that video comes out. But anyway, thank you all for listening, thank you all for watching, and see you next time. Goodbye! Thanks for watching. Be sure to like, favourite, subscribe, click the bell, and do all the YouTubey stuff that YouTube wants you to do. Go on, it'll do me a power of good. Until next time, my friends, goodbye!